Finding common ground on today's hottest issues is possible if we believe that what unites us is greater than what divides us. Welcome to Common Ground Radio with Mark Shurtleff and Ted McBride.
Good afternoon, Salt Lake City. Welcome to, I'm not sure if it's Common Ground, Talk with Ted, or Talk with Sky and Ted. We've got Mark Shurtleff is out of town today, so it won't be Common Ground, but I've got a special guest host with me today, Sky Lazaro. How are you, Sky?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. If you could speak a little closer to the microphone. And it is probably going to be more like a Talk with Ted episode. I was on the other day talking about the Unabomber and political correctness, and it was an interesting show. And Sky, I'm sure you've listened to it at least 3 times already.
Absolutely.
Right? Even a little closer.
It was the first thing I did.
Thank you. It's the first thing my mom did. Shout out to my mom, Ann McBride, back in Goshen, New York. My name's Ted McBride. I'm a lawyer here in town, transplanted New Yorker, and I've got the great opportunity and luxury to do a radio show a couple of times a week on my own on Tuesdays and with Mark Shurtleff on Thursdays. Yeah, that's better, Alan. And I've got my sound guy, Alan Anderson, with me here again today because I'm just terrible with the technology, and it would be a disastrous show if I didn't have him. And what a beautiful day. It's finally not raining.
Yes.
Isn't that nice?
So nice.
It's been brutal for the past couple of weeks. We had a tough winter here with a lot of snow. Great if you're a skier. Bad if you got a bad back and you got to dig all that snow out all the time. And then for the past couple of weeks, it seemed like we were living in Portland, Oregon. It was just raining. I know we need it, but I'm glad to see the sun out. And it's just a beautiful day out there. Tuesday, I did a show. I hope some of you got to listen to a show about political correctness and the Unabomber manifesto. And in preparing for that show and doing it, I found it more interesting in hindsight 24 years later than perhaps when I read it back at the time. But the Unabomber, we all know well, unless you're too young, a gentleman by the name of Ted Kaczynski, who was a bit of a genius, a professor that gave up his academic career in 1969, became a bit of a recluse, moved to your neck of the woods, Sky. You lived up in Montana.
It's a good Montana spot.
So you know all of the Unabomber information. Is your mic on?
Yeah.
I'm having a hard time hearing Sky. We're going to switch microphones with Sky. But Ted Kaczynski was on, and of course he, over a course of 20 years from 1975 to 1995, he wreaked terror on scientists across the country, including a couple of bombs here in Salt Lake City, one that injured a man, I think his name is Daniel Wright, caused some severe neurological damage to his arms, and he was a real menace. And back in 1995, he demanded of the press, the New York Times and the Washington Post in particular, that they post a 35,000-word manifesto about how technology and industrialism was causing widespread problems and he was trying to incite a revolution to basically end technological and industrial development. And I think that we can say safely 24 years later he failed at that. But there were some interesting insights in his writings, including about the psychological security that people have, or the lack of it in the modern world. And I'm going to hog the microphone here for a little bit, and Sky's going to join more substantively in the second segment, because I promised people, the 3 or 4 that were listening on Tuesday, that I'd follow up with a few more thoughts on that. And he believed that technology and over-socialization, which he felt like were almost too many norms, too many standards, and a difficulty of leading a fulfilling life in the modern world. And over-socialization is what he calls it. And I've got a few Rush quotes, Rush lyrics I'm going to read here that are sort of in the same vein, that go back to the 1980s when I was in high school and college and being influenced by rock stars. But one of the things that Ted Kaczynski points to is that the lack of fulfillment in the modern life And he believes that we need to have goals, that we need to have to exert effort to achieve those goals, to have a reasonable to reasonably ascertain some of those goals, and to do it with a degree of autonomy, to be able to do it yourself. And he believed that those fundamental things lacked in our modern world, that it was almost too easy to attain some of the goals for survival, your clothing, your shelter. And he'd say, you go to trade school, you learn a trade, you show up to a job, you do a reasonable job, and you're able to attain those things, but not with a lot of autonomy. He also believes that human beings have this need for power and the power structure, and that those things enable the human to sort of take care of themselves physically and psychologically. And I think if you were to go out on the street today and do a survey and ask people, who had greater psychological security, primitive people or modern people, the knee-jerk reaction would be, well, modern people. It's sort of easier to take care of ourselves with the technology. We've got better medicine, better facilities. But he makes an interesting point about how back in more primitive times, human beings were able to take those challenges head on. So if there was a need for food or for shelter or defense against wild animals, it was something that the more primitive person or the more rural person was in control of. And in this day and age, the threats that we have are more from sources that we can't control. Nuclear disaster. We're all dependent on the financial system. We all felt a bit of that breakdown in 2008. And he makes interesting points about how modern society is leading toward the development of more psychological problems than perhaps more primitive people had. And I think that's interesting food for thought. I didn't get into any of his bombings. I didn't try to sensationalize him at all. I'm not suggesting that we incite a revolution against the industrial technological complex. We're all part of it. We all need it. But with that said, I think that there's probably some truth to some of his theories about modern psychological suffering. And I know for myself, I'm not afraid to say I've suffered from some depression and other issues in my adult life, and I think many people have. And I don't think that there's a great enough emphasis on mental health care. It's changing, but I think that it's a really important thing. And we see kids shooting up schools and movie theaters, and I think that there's just incredible pent-up frustration about how to live in this world, how to feel fulfilled in this world, and how to live up to some standards that may be sort of impossible to live up to. And I'll take our universities, for example. Political correctness, we say a lot of it exists on college campuses, and a righteousness and a high morality and a censorship on the language that we want to use. And then at the same time, we see scandals in those universities. Recruiting scandals involving college coaches and kickbacks to families of basketball players through sneaker companies. And there was a recent scandal, an admissions scandal, but with many of the big prestigious universities. And so we need standards. We need to try to live up to those standards. But at the same time, it can be very hard, and it can be difficult, I think, particularly for young people who are now entering college and entering the workforce in the face of technology and artificial intelligence and eliminating jobs and a greater gap between the rich and poor. And we've got a lot of modern problems that we need to take care of, and I think one of them at the forefront is psychological problems. Speaking of which, I've already mentioned that I've suffered from depression periodically through my adult life, including today. because the Utah Jazz got crushed again last night.
It's rough.
Crushed by 30 points. And I'm not going to talk about the Utah Jazz today because I'm a little bit disgusted with their effort, except to mention one thing. There's one play in that game that stands out in my mind. And I said on the radio the other day, there's not enough hustle. It's the playoffs. They got to dive. They got to be on the floor. And there was a play where the Rockets were up 25, 30, maybe 40 points, and the ball was on the ground, and one guy got his whole body on the ground to get that ball, and that was Chris Paul. And I saw two Jazz players. It was Crowder and Joe Ingles, and they were bending over for the ball. And I think it ended up in a jump ball, but it just showed that the tenacity of the Rockets and the level that they were playing at. And while the Jazz were bending over for the ball, the Rockets were diving after it. And so I hope we can see a little change in that the next game, because I don't want the Jazz season to end abruptly in this first round of the playoffs. So I've got faith in them that they'll be a little more energized when they get back to that Vivint Home Solution Arena and have our great fans cheering them on. But we got to cheer them on like crazy. We got to get some energy, get some of Coach Quinn Snyder's energy into those players. Speaking of coaches, Sky, you just advised me of perhaps a coaching change here at the collegiate level in Utah?
Yeah, interestingly, the University of Utah, DeMarlo Slocum, this staff is actually the longest tenured staff, I believe, in the Pac-12 at this point, or was. DeMarlo Slocum just left to join UNLV, which is where he's from. And in his place, it sounds like they're going to bring in Donnie Daniels. Donnie Daniels.
They're not calling me?
They're not calling you. You need to get out more on the radio show, or talk nicer about the Jazz more often.
Who's Donnie Daniels?
Donnie Daniels coached with the legendary Rick Majerus for I believe 11 years as an assistant, and then for the past, I want to say 9 or so, he's been an assistant with Gonzaga staff. So
they've been great for a while.
Very good. Yeah, Mark Few has done an amazing job there. So I think, could bring some new recruiting options. I don't believe, or at least I haven't seen, that his role has been defined at this point.
So you've got the inside scoop, is that what I'm hearing?
Well, I mean, I follow Ute Fan Faithful on Facebook, so there you go.
That's how you do it. Good for you. Well, how about that? I've got a co-host that's a basketball junkie like me, so that's pretty terrific. But that's all. We're going to leave it at the Jazz today, because I think I may have cursed them by trying to cheer them on too much. So we're just going to hold our breath and see how they do the next game. But I want to read lyrics from one of my favorite bands in sort of a follow-up to that, my comments on the modern world and the challenges, particularly that kids face, and maybe the lack of options that we have, political correctness, and that band is Rush. And Rush are 3 guys from Toronto, Canada. 2 of them are parents were Holocaust survivors, Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson, and they had a great song when I was in high school called Subdivisions. And it was about sort of the outcast kid in high school that didn't fit in with everyone. And I'm going to read just one verse from their song, going out of the first segment. Sprawling on the fringes of the city, in geometric order, an insulated border, in between the bright lights and the far unlit unknown. Growing up, it all seemed so one-sided, opinions all provided, the future pre-decided, detached and subdivided in the mass production zone. Nowhere is the dreamer or the misfit so alone. And that's a song from back in the 80s, and it's really talking about living in the suburbs, in between the city and rural area, and opinions all provided, the future pre-decided. And I think that ties into what Ted Kaczynski was saying about life in the modern world and political correctivism and not having enough control over your own life. And maybe that's something that the mental health unit industry needs to focus on more to address some of our modern problems. We'll be right back with more Rush quotes. To talk with Ted and Sky, I think would be the appropriate name of the show for today. Sky Lazaro, a criminal defense lawyer, personal injury lawyer, general litigator extraordinaire here in town. So you got a couple of trial lawyers on the air here. And Sky and Mark Shurtleff and I are struggling to get my grammar correct. I'm a little bit of an idiot, Sky.
Nonsense.
Probably more than a little bit of an idiot. Are thinking about creating our own law firm.
You can't just tell me you're an idiot and then jump into that.
That's true. So we're done with that discussion, apparently. But, I've got a little philosophy that as being a lawyer, I like to think I'm never right. Because once I think I'm right, I stop thinking. And I think that maybe I might be 99% right, but I never think I'm completely right because I've done it before. Let my guard down and then get burned because nobody sees everything. I don't have eyes in the back of my head. And I think it's good to have some humility, and I've got plenty of it because I make mistakes on the radio here all the time. I mispronounce things. I call people the wrong name. So I really am a bit of an idiot. But I think that it's good to be a little humble rather than arrogant. And I've gotten up in court, and I've been arrogant in court too, where I think I know it all. We're lawyers, right? We're supposed to have all the answers.
Great.
And I think it's important to remind ourselves that there's another side.
Yeah, and I think it's equally important to have some humility even when you know you're right in court. I think that tends to go much further than the alternative. Yeah,
isn't that the truth? Because I've been burned with that too. I've had my fair share of success, but nobody wins every case.
No.
Yeah. Going out, I was quoting some lyrics from my favorite band, Rush, and their lyricist is a guy named Neil Peart, the great drummer, the great philosopher, and I don't agree with everything that he says, but Rush has got some great philosophy in their lyrics, and I've listened to Rush my whole life, and there's another song of theirs called Distant Early Warning. And this also, the lyrics from this also relate a bit, I think, to the modern world and the problems that Ted Kaczynski was addressing, and maybe some of the psychological problems or the loss of control that we have over some of the problems and the fears that we face, and then the insecurity that arises from that, and the feeling of sort of helplessness. And Ted Kaczynski also says that part of a leftist movement is an attempt to acquire that power that we need, that we human beings need, that we can't get under our modern economic, industrial, technological system, and so that we attach ourselves to movements where we have maybe little influence, but to try to still feel some of that power or meaning. And I just find it interesting stuff. But Subdivisions, what I just read from, is sort of the kid growing up that doesn't quite fit in, opinions all provided, the future pre-decided, detached and subdivided in the mass production zone, kind of sums up, the feeling of the kid in this industrial world. Distant Early Warning is another one, and I'm going to read some lyrics from that, and then we'll get to the law business. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
Can you indulge me for another minute?
I can, only because I really love Canada.
What about Rush? Do you really love Rush?
Rush is great.
You're a woman. You probably have never even heard of them. Right? You go to a Rush concert,
exactly
it's 95% men. Distant Early Warning, okay? An ill wind comes arising across the cities of the plain. There's no swimming in the heavy water, no singing in the acid rain. It's so hard to stay together, passing through revolving doors. We need someone to talk to and someone to sweep the floors. The world weighs on my shoulders, but what am I to do? You sometimes drive me crazy, but I worry about you. I know it makes no difference to what you're going through, but I see the tip of the iceberg, and I worry about you. And this song is about, the heavy water. It's about nuclear power and nuclear war, and the world weighed on my shoulders, and what am I to do? You sometimes drive me crazy, but I worry about you. And again, it's that helplessness that we all feel and can sense in the modern world. And so my discussion about Ted Kaczynski the other day, again, was not trying to inspire any kind of revolution or to condone him in any way, but just to emphasize that I think he's not the only one to have identified sort of the disconnect between our role in the modern world and our quest for fulfillment in this life. And we're lucky, Sky, because we're lawyers. We're partially lucky because we're lawyers. But being a lawyer can be a really great job.
I love being a lawyer.
It can be really fulfilling and helping people, and I know you help people inside and outside the law.
Yeah, I do whatever I can. I think we all have a responsibility to make our communities and our little corner of the world a better place. And
my corner is pretty small.
well,
What have you been doing lately to make your corner of the world a better place?
I'm still heavily involved in the Homeless Youth Resource Center. I believe we have another breakfast coming up next week. They just had their big founders celebration fundraising breakfast. They raised, I cannot remember the exact amount, but it was a significant amount of money. It was really well attended. So, I mean, we're grateful for all the community sponsors that step forward and fill tables.
How can people give or get involved in that?
I think the most important thing is, you can sign up to do breakfast, lunches, dinners, those sorts of things. They also have the Women and Children's Center, and they are always in need of donations. And I know we're headed into spring, so I would urge people as they're cleaning out their closets and sort of doing their spring cleaning that, instead of just throwing things out or dropping them off at the DI, put them in a box, Facebook me. I'll come pick them up if you don't want to run them downtown, things like that.
And where can the donations be made to?
They can be made directly to the Women's Resource Center, or you can contact the VOA, and they can give you the drop-off. I believe they have a Facebook page, too.
Okay. Because I know my sister was highly impressed with you when I had you on a month or two ago.
Well, I'm flattered.
And she wanted to know, shout out to Kathy if she's listening. She's on vacation in Hawaii, so she's probably not listening.
I hope she's not listening. Let me start there.
For her sake. Or if she is, it's on a beach with the headphones
yes.
on. She loves her brother, so she may be listening. I've got 3 wonderful sisters. My daughter is doing a project with National Geographic, and she's got to do some community service, get some community service hours. Do you have any thoughts you can help me with that I can get Morgan involved in?
When I reached out last time, there were some people that contacted me about doing some Eagle Scout projects, and with kids under 16, we can't have them at the Homeless Youth Center because of liability reasons.
Sure.
Understandably. But you know what? I have sort of urged some of these kids to do if they want, and it's kind of a fun community involvement project, even if you just do it in your neighborhood, is to start a drive, collect, deodorant and socks and, toothbrushes, toothpaste, those sorts of things, clothing, gently used clothing, toys.
And we could do that, and then we could bring it to you.
Exactly, and then you can kind of get your friends involved in it and kind of make it a fun little project for a few weeks. Or
that's awesome. What do you think, Alan?
I don't have any sound.
You don't have any sound. Good. We got you tuned out today. Sky, I do my show is not really political. I don't know what it is. It's a little bit of nonsense. It's pop culture. It's a little bit of philosophy, a little bit of law, basketball, Rush. This is episode 24, so I've always got to tie it to some basketball hero. Wasn't Kobe Bryant number 24? I think he was. He had 2 numbers, 8 and 24. They'll have to retire both of them when.
I can tell you my son's hockey number is 24.
Oh, is it? So there you
go.
So it's no coincidence that you're on, because this is episode 24. But I'm a pretty moderate person, and being a lawyer has made me that way.
Yeah, I think you have to be.
You have to be. It's hard if you want to take like some real far-reaching political philosophy and try to apply it to your law business. I think that you're probably only hurting your client.
Exactly. Also, I think we have to keep kind of in perspective, we are getting people, whether it's a civil case or a criminal case, and this is the absolute worst thing that has ever happened to them. I think as soon as someone thinks, oh my God, I have to call a lawyer, the wheels have fallen off somewhere.
Oh, just the thought of it is causes anxiety.
And so, we have people who are anxious, terrified, everything. And so I think we have to stay the calm in the storm.
Yeah. And I think it's important, too, that I like to say there's no moral high ground in litigation, certainly in civil litigation, except for the exceptional case, maybe Mark Shurtleff's case. There's moral high ground in that one, and he had it. But I think in many, many cases, where people bring claims, whether it's a breach of contract or a malpractice case, people may well have had their rights violated, but the person that violated those rights is also entitled to a defense.
Correct.
And so I've even learned that the hard way. So as I've gotten older, I've gotten more, I don't even want to say conservative, but I've gotten more moderate. I'm not a protester. And I use as an example taxes. Okay, some people think we should tax higher, tax the rich more, and have the government redistribute the wealth through social programs. And other people believe that lower taxes are better, lead to consolidated wealth, which can lead to people forming businesses and being able to provide jobs, and sort of the trickle-down theory, right? Which is better, Sky Lazaro?
I'm going to leave that alone. I think I think if we address anything, there's been some proposals with regard to tax reform locally that people should be aware of, because I think it affects consumers and small businesses alike, and that's the new tax bill that's proposed to tax services.
You've been heavily involved in that.
I was involved in that through the Utah State Bar. Lawyers obviously opposed it.
So explain that. When my services would be taxed, I'd have to put a sales tax on top of my bill?
That's correct. And so, I think it extended to there was only a few carved out exceptions. One of those was real estate, and I can't remember the other one.
The realtors. The realtors got the exception because the whole legislature
are brokers, so
right, or contractors.
Probably.
What about medical providers?
I think there was some medical exceptions. I don't remember those specifically. But the crux of the bill basically, taxed everything from, barbershops to plumbers to lawyers. And I think the problem is, well, one, if you have a small business, it becomes a nightmare for all of us. Two is, at least in the criminal defense realm, and I think probably family law and some of those other civil aspects, is it trickles down to the consumer. And so all of a sudden we have to raise our fees to account for that. And I think what starts happening is you start precluding people access to justice.
Yeah, I agree with you. And interestingly, Mitt Romney had a theory. I'm not sure if he still does, but probably does. But I do believe in this, that I think taxing corporations is a little bit of a fallacy, because they just pass the cost down onto us. Mm-hmm. And they're the only, a corporation is a fictitious entity or a fictitious individual, but it's only individuals that pay taxes.
Well, there's some Supreme Court cases out there that give corporations equal standing to an individual. So
agreed, but all I'm saying is that they're just going to pass it on to us.
Right, we're going to pay it regardless.
Yep.
So we're going to pay it on one end or the other.
Or if you own stock or your 401k is invested in that corporation, well, then that's just less dividend for you, and you're paying that tax anyway. Right. So that is one theory that I do kind of believe in, that taxing corporations, maybe it's necessary. I'm not saying don't do it, but all I'm saying is that ultimately it comes down to us.
Right.
And just on my protester comment that I made, so I'm not going to go out and pick it. Your issue is different with the personal taxes. I feel very strongly, like you do, that shouldn't pass. Okay, but just on like the big, more philosophical realm, higher taxes to distribute the wealth or lower taxes and let the market system play out? I don't know the answer to that question ultimately, and that's kind of why I'm not a protester. I'll let other people do the protesting.
Just real quick, and then we can move on. I was on a flight, one of my many flights recently, and I read an interesting article talking about what tax bases should be adjusted written by an economist, and I don't remember who. I probably should have saved the article. But what they were talking about is who they should give tax breaks to and who should be taxed more, and what sector should be essentially left alone. And so kind of what they concluded, and I believe it was sort of the middle to upper middle class, I guess is what they said, was at least their income earnings have risen at least somewhat equally to the cost of living. Whereas for the lower middle class and then, the people living below that, they can't afford to live essentially without some help.
Right. And then imagine if the bill passes with the taxes on the personal services here in Utah, it's just going to make it more expensive for the less well-off.
Right.
I find it a little bit hard to believe that they're pushing that here in Utah, too, because we have such an incredible tax base from the natural resources in this state.
Surplus.
Last year, there was $1 billion surplus, was it? And so there's a lot of money to go around here. Have you been to the new courthouse down in Provo?
I have.
Isn't that some building?
Yes.
I could take you to New York and you'd see the courthouses are falling apart. Do you have I feel like we're going to come up on a commercial, Alan. And so interesting stuff. We're fortunate to live in such a well-off place, but to me it doesn't make much sense to anyone for our local governments to be taxing those types of personal services.
I agree.
I didn't know we'd be talking about that today. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with Talk with Ted and Sky. To Talk with Ted and Sky, Thursday edition. My name's Ted McBride. I'm a lawyer here in Salt Lake City. It is 4:44 on April 18th.
Yes.
Is that what it is? 18th?
All day.
April 18th, all day. It feels like spring is finally around the corner. We've got Easter on Sunday. That should be fun. I've got an Easter egg hunt planned. Your boy's probably too old for that.
Yes. I think we're past that point.
Are you playing Hockey Mom this weekend anywhere?
No.
No?
Lacrosse on Friday night.
Lacrosse on Friday
and
night.
Brighton is currently #1 in the state.
Oh, really? Oh, that's exciting. So
Yes.
your boy plays lacrosse as well?
He does.
He sounds like quite the athlete.
He does love his sports.
Yeah, I did too growing up. I played basketball in the rain and the snow. What about you? You're 5'10"?
I am.
Did you play volleyball?
I played some sports in high school. I was a horse girl.
A horse girl?
So, yeah.
Cool. What about now? What do you do for leisure and adventure now?
Hot yoga and hiking.
Hot yoga and hiking.
What's hot yoga?
Doing yoga in a 120-degree room.
With weights.
Oh.
You have to use weights.
I already did my session this morning. Yeah, so I'm good.
I was there in the office.
I'm already all cooled off.
I'll take you, Alan.
When I was in law school, I learned very quickly that there wasn't a right answer to many of the tests, especially like first-year law school, and that what they really wanted you to do was argue both sides, right?
Fair.
And that's kind of what we're talking about, how you get too hung up on the righteousness of your position, you're not going to see the other side. Then when you get out of law school, you get into sort of the precision of language, right?
Correct.
So I've had many law clerks work for me, or I've interviewed many of them, and I always do the same thing to the kids that come in, and I ask them a question, and I'll ask it of you and to our guests. And that's a very simple question. Did you make any left-hand turns today?
If I'm wrong, do I get fired from this job?
Well, no, maybe if you're wrong, you'll be qualified to start a law firm with me, the idiot lawyer. But I like to ask, did you make any left-hand turns today?
Yes.
And so for the people out there thinking your mind's eye, where were you when you made your first left-hand turn?
I turned from Bengal Boulevard onto Wasatch.
Okay. Are you in a car?
Yes.
Who put you in a car?
I put myself in the car.
And that's why I like to ask that question, because I ask it in such a way that makes you think that it's driving, because the way I phrase it, did you make any left-hand turns? But I like to say, yeah, I made a left-hand turn when I got up. It was when I walked out of my bedroom and made a left toward the bathroom. Okay. And I just use that. It's a vague question. Deliberately, I want you to think you're in a car. And so I ask you left-hand turns.
It's the only time I know my right from my left. So let's start there.
Oh, is that it? Okay. So that's, you're hired. But I like to put that out there because language is very imprecise. And language can be confusing, and it's hard to be super accurate. Now, if I had asked you, when's the first time you turned left today? You might have answered that question differently, right?
Likely, yes.
But many, many people put themselves in a car, and I think that it just kind of illustrates the challenges of language and how sometimes we think we're talking about the same thing and we're not. Right? And it's clearly, I asked you a misleading question. I was trying to put you in a car, but I didn't say anything about a car. A trial, as you know, you think about the stress of someone that's in court, maybe someone with a serious criminal charge. And we don't have video cameras following us around and recording every move we make. At least we don't think we do. We might. We're moving toward that. But as you know, a trial isn't a recreation of an event. It's a description of an event.
Right.
Right? And so it's really important for lawyers to be able to describe things accurately.
Well, I think that starts with asking the right questions.
Right. And even my question was kind of a poor one. Did you make any left-hand turns? What are you talking about? Right. And if I was trying to be more precise, I could have been. But it does start with the lawyers. But would you agree with me that one of the most challenging things of being a trial lawyer is to try to elicit accurate testimony on direct testimony where you can't ask leading questions from a witness or a client who is not very articulate?
Absolutely. I think direct examination is one of the hardest portions of a trial, and I think it's especially hard for defense lawyers. We're trained from the beginning to be good cross-examiners, and we sometimes fall short of getting our client's story out because we aren't as good.
It's hard
at asking the right questions.
And we're restricted in the system where we can't ask those leading questions and all of those details, but
Right.
That can be real challenging. And that's why I think maybe the system even needs to be changed a little bit like that, because I've experienced it a number of times where you have people that just are not that articulate, and I try, you can say, can you elaborate any further, right? We can ask those questions, right? But you can't say, isn't it true that you took 4 steps and it was 6.5 seconds and then you made a left before you reached for that, right?
Right.
Those questions are a whole lot easier, right?
And then what is always a good fallback if you get lost.
Yeah, and but again, the problem, if you're not a real articulate person, you can really have a hard time explaining yourself in court, which is why it's even more important to have a good lawyer if you're charged or facing something real serious.
Well, absolutely. I mean, you have to put the time in to prepare your client. I mean, if you're not doing that, you're...
One time I had a medical malpractice case against St. Mark's Hospital that I won back in 2005. And it was a tragic case from a woman who suffered, she had a gastric bypass and then had complications, and she was in the ICU for a month, and she had a trach in her neck because she, to help her breathe, she was on a ventilator. And she was transferred out of the ICU to the PCU, the less intensely covered unit, on the morning of 9/11.
Oh, geez.
And then that night at about midnight, she developed a blockage in her throat, and she was connected to telemetry alarms where the alarms were going off because her heart rate was going down. But like the rest of the world, the people that were supposed to be watching her were probably watching TV thinking that we were watching the end of the world. Mm-hmm. But it was a collateral victim here in Salt Lake City from 9/11. But I went to Rock Springs, Wyoming on 2 occasions to prep her husband on his testimony. And he would be not a hostile witness, so it was direct testimony. And you say you got to prep your clients, right, and your witnesses, and I prepped him for hours. And he was the worst witness I've ever had in my life.
And I got to tell you, when you think you know what your client is going to say or prepare them to say things, and then they get up there and have their own script, it is that podium is the loneliest place in the world, and there is nothing you can do to stop it.
It can be a hard job, right? We take on a lot. We absorb other people's problems and feel responsible when it doesn't go the way that we want it to go.
Right.
And I like to tell lawyers, you can shape reality a little bit, or try to, but you can't change it.
No. A motion to change the facts I don't believe has ever been well received by a court.
Yeah. Park City. I've lived in Park City for over 20 years, and we've got a couple of stories coming out of Park City. And Park City's changed over the years. It used to be a little hippie town when I moved there, a little ski bum town, and it's become more of sort of a bit of an elitist town. There's a lot of money up in Park City, and I know a lot of people that have had to move out of Old Town and move to Heber or Camas or down to Salt Lake City because it's just gotten so expensive. But there's a couple of stories out of Park City. You've got one on your lap there, and I've got another one. What are you looking at, Sky?
I'm looking at a story entitled "Park City Police Told Woman Upset, quote, she has to look at, end quote, homeless people."
Homeless people in Park City. You see them now. You can see people panhandling at the exits and stuff. But that is that she's upset that she has to look at them.
Right.
We can't avoid that down here in the valley, can we?
We cannot.
They're harder to find at Pioneer Park.
They have done a good job. Well, they're reconstructing Pioneer Park.
Yes,
so
they've got it all roped off.
And, so I think that's probably at least solved the problem temporarily.
Has it solved it, or has it just scattered it?
I think if you go to the other side of the Gateway, is that Fifth West or whatever that is, you'll see them there. And I think they've, moved to other parts of the city. I think they've done some work at least trying to open shelters in different areas.
Yeah, they've got those. Has they begun any work on any of those shelters that have been proposed?
I do not actually know.
Yeah, they were supposed to have that one down in Sugar House. Remember that? And there was the big protest against it.
Huge thing. I think this whole thing goes to, we all want to believe that we are open-minded and don't have biases and are all accepting of people until you put it in our neighborhood.
Not in my backyard.
Exactly. Just one brief comment on the Jazz. Kyle Corver wrote that really good op-ed on racism and how we all like to think we aren't, and then you realize, really, maybe I am. Yeah,
and we're sort of indoctrinated, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I saw that Kyle Corver. I was delighted to see him back on the Jazz.
Yes.
He's a good guy.
Yeah.
And he did a benefit for Alan. Who was that?
It was my stepdaughter who had leukemia cancer.
Alan's stepdaughter had leukemia cancer, and Kyle Corver a couple of years ago did a benefit, came and shot hoops with them and helped raise some money. Yeah. And raise some awareness. And so it's great to have him in the community. It's nice to see that the white guys step up and say those things.
Right. Yeah. I think it's it's kind of that not in my backyard thing.
Yeah. So. Yeah. I've got another one out of Park City. In Park City, this one was brought to my attention by a friend of mine, Scott Rabin, great guy, realtor up there in Park City. And there was an incident where a conservative group at the high school had gotten together. I don't know if they were having a speaker, I think it was. And a kid came along that's part of a liberal group that didn't agree with the conservative group and what they were doing, and pepper sprayed the area where that conference or meeting was to take place. And so this is a letter from Jonathan Mount in Park City, a guest editorial, and it's entitled, "A Conservative Student at Park City High School Shares His Story." I am one of the kids who was sickened by bear spray at Park City High School on April 1. The Park Record reports the suspected perpetrator is a fellow student who has been charged by the Summit County Attorney's Office with 18 criminal counts. I am Jewish and gay, and also a conservative who is a member of the group that was scheduled to host an event in the Park City High School lecture hall and may have been targeted by the release. I would like to share my story. My mother is Jewish. Her family escaped persecution by socialists in Germany and communists in Russia, luckily before World War II. My father's family is from a poor rural area in Alabama. His grandparents were sharecroppers. His parents grew up picking cotton and didn't have electricity or running water. Many people might call them rednecks or hillbillies. My mother became an orthodontist by paying her way through school, borrowing $250,000 in the 1980s. My father finished his high school math curriculum in 10th grade. His parents, even though my grandfather never graduated from high school, encouraged him to continue to learn through other means. My father aspired to go to the best engineering school in the world. His family thought this was crazy. When he was 17, my father got on a Greyhound bus alone and took the 24-hour trip to Boston to enroll in MIT. He went on to a top business school, started a business on Wall Street, and became one of the youngest partners at a prestigious investment bank. My father survived the 9/11 attacks, only to die 8 years later from what some have labeled a 9/11-related illness, although we'll never know that for sure. We're coming into a break, and when I come back, I'll finish the second half of this young man's letter. Stay. Welcome back. It's not Common Ground. I think Mark Shurtleff has leaned so far left, he's fallen clear out of the state. I think he's in Florida taking care of some business. Mark represents some mom-and-pop body shops taking on insurance companies for dictating how they need to go about to fix our cars after serious accidents. So he's got a big one he's dealing with. But when we went off the air, I was halfway through a guest editorial from a high school kid, Jonathan Mount, up in Park City. And he was part of a conservative group getting ready to host an event in which another kid in the school came in and put a pepper spray or bear spray in the area. And he talked in the first part of his letter about he comes from his mother's Jewish, and his grandmother and grandfather survived atrocities in Germany under and communists in Russia. His father grew up poor in the South and got himself enrolled at MIT and went on to become a worker on Wall Street and died 8 years after 9/11 from what might have been 9/11 related illnesses. But I got cut off in the middle of that, but now I'm getting sort of to the substance of it. Back to the letter. My parents are the poster children for the American dream. They paid for their fair share of taxes and paid it forward by giving significant donations to educational organizations, including here in Park City, to help underprivileged kids. We believe we are good people, and I think most people who know us would say the same. Yet my brothers and I have been called racists and Nazis in our respective schools, including here at Park City High School. Why? Because we believe the United States is the greatest country in the world. Because we believe capitalism, while not perfect, has lifted hundreds of millions of people around the world out of poverty, and hundreds of millions have been oppressed or murdered in the name of socialism and communism. Because we believe that people should be rewarded for hard work and perseverance, not handed things on a silver platter. Because we believe that the First Amendment applies to all speech, including those who call Jewish Americans like ourselves Nazis. Because we believe that the Second Amendment is a right, and most gun owners are law-abiding citizens. Because we believe there is a crisis at our southern border. Because we believe that radical Islamic extremists should be called out by name. Because we don't believe illegal immigrants should have the right to vote. You get the idea. The thing that hurts me most is not my throat from the coughing. It is not my chest from the bear spray. It is not my stomach from the vomiting. It is the possibility that a student sought to stifle free speech at Park City High School by targeting a club hosting a conservative speaker at a lecture hall that evening. The high schoolers who put this event together worked tremendously hard. The parents who donated to this event were extremely generous. Kids make stupid mistakes all the time. I have made mistakes myself. I invite the student and his family to spend some time with my family and me, and perhaps some of the thousands or other conservatives who are his neighbors and classmates in Park City. I think that would do more to teach him a lesson than anything the courts could order. That is some letter. And that's the approach that I think that we need to bring people together. Because here's this kid expressing some forgiveness and wants to create a dialogue with this kid that this conservative sees the importance of communication and tolerance. And it's often that the lefts and the liberals are given credit for that. Being tolerant and offering that forgiveness and sort of having that moral high ground. And just to tie it into my point a little earlier, Sky, I think in litigation there's no moral high ground, and I think the same thing is true in left and right politics. There's no moral high ground because what we all want is a balance. Right.
And I think if more people in positions of power took this kid's approach, we would probably be much further ahead as a country right now.
And maybe these kids are learning, and maybe they're learning from our mistakes, because I think it's the adults and the political environment that fosters this kind of thing, because these kids didn't make this up. They're learning it from somewhere. With that said, we're going to, we've got a caller. We've got a sponsor on the phone here. Ray, are you with me?
I'm here. How are you today?
Good. Ray, before I hack up your last name, will you say it for me?
It's Sherman.
Sherman, that easy. It's spelled a little bit differently. Scheurman.
Sounds like yeah.
Ray, we're having a great show, and you're a sponsor of the show, and we're going to give you a little pitch here. Swim spas. What's a swim spa?
Well, just imagine something like a big hot tub. We have a couple of them on display here at the store. One's 16 feet, other one's 14 feet long. They're typically all around 7.5 feet wide. But it's a vessel full of water that you can do aqua aerobics in. You can swim in. You can just chill out in and sit like a regular hot tub. You can change the temperature to what you like. Most people, when they do aqua aerobics or swimming, probably keep the temperature around between 90 and 95 degrees, somewhere in there.
Now,
yeah.
I've seen, Ray, I've seen these pools in people's homes with just like a little current flowing. Is this different than that? I've got on my notes here, new in the industry. What's new about it?
So, yeah, it's similar to what you're talking about. We have this new Vita Spa that we have, is the 16-footer that's full of water. Has some revolutionary new jets called river jets. They're extreme jets that are oval in shape, and there's 3 big ones that give you more of a laminar flow that you set up a current, much like swimming in a river, and you can do your breaststroke or freestyle, and this particular model is one of the largest or biggest in depth. It's 60 inches, so we just had a customer in here last week that did a butterfly stroke in one, which is kind of hard to do in a shallower depth swim spa. But you're right, it does, it sets up a current, and you can do your either swims, or you can jog or run in place or walk in place. But it's great for aerobics, cardiovascular, muscle toning and building. And like for me, I just had my hip replaced here, and it's been great to kind of doing some rehab to get things going, going there.
So tell us.
A lot of fun too.
I got to tell you, Ray, as you're talking, I've got a daughter that's quite a swimmer. In fact, I'm going up when I leave the show here to watch her train. I'm afraid that this is going to cost me some money, because she's going to want one of these things.
Well, you know what? We've had some cross trainers or triathletes that have bought these. But yeah, they're good for that kind of thing. It's an easy way to get some training in, and then. One, I think the big selling, a couple of them actually. One, they're a lot cheaper than buying an in-ground swimming pool. I mean, you're looking at $75,000 to $95,000 today for a good in-ground pool.
I told her she can't have that.
Yeah, so most above-ground or swim spas will run somewhere in the range of $20,000 to $30,000, somewhere in there, depending on the size and features, But the other plus to it too is we were able to swim this winter, and that where most people in a swimming pool have to shut it down and say in September, and then wait till springtime to open it back up. And so that's a big plus for us here in Utah. We can be out there in 30-degree weather swimming year round. It's great.
Do you have a retail store, Ray?
Yeah, we were down here off of the 90th South exit on the east side frontage road. It says Sundance Spas on the building. We're about 2 blocks south. You can see us from the freeway, actually, if you drive by. And we're also a Sundance Spa dealer. We sell hot tubs coincide with the swim spas.
I got some good friends back in New York that are in the pool and spa business. They go to some great conventions down in Las Vegas. Do you get a chance to go to any of those?
Oh, yeah. It's a big, this swim spa is a burgeoning new part of our industry. So they're getting very popular. And again, it's now fitting a lifestyle that they can afford. And also, if they are restricted in space, they can put this in a lot more of a confined space than, say, a big, swimming pool.
Ray, do you sell most of them on new construction, or you sell them to existing homeowners as well?
Yeah, mainly existing. Our prices include an installation other than the crane, and we coordinate a crane for the customer, and they pay the crane person when we come out that day, but we'll crane them over the house. It's quite a spectacle. I tell them to get their cameras ready because it's kind of a unique process that this thing gets slung up and over their house and back into their backyard. But typically they have a flat concrete area surface to put it on, and then their only requirement is to have 220 volts, 60 amps, and that's about it, and just garden hose to fill, and they're off and running.
And you can use it all year round.
That's the beauty of it. Yeah, it's pretty impressive to be able to swim here in Utah in the middle of January.
What kind of energy does it consume? I had a neighbor up in Park City put in a pool, the only one in the area in Pine Brook. There's one outdoor pool up there, and it's a heated pool. And I got to think it costs a fortune to keep that thing heated during the winter. What about these swim spas?
You're absolutely right, because we've had a couple in-ground pools in our former houses, and we would try to extend the season or get an early start, and it could be $300-400 just for that particular month, not the dead of winter. But on a swim spa, the Vitas are very energy efficient. We have a thermal copper reflective insulation package, but they average $60 a month. It's not too bad.
That's not bad.
No.
That's no more expensive than the gym.
Well, plus it's always at your disposal to go out there and swim anytime you want. We'll be swimming tomorrow morning before we go to work, and but there's so many. The kids love it when they're come over to swim in our swim spa, and it's just a great. I think it's a great thing for the family. To either enjoy for health benefits or just play in a pool.
What kind of demographics? What type of people do you see utilizing these swim spas for the most part?
Anybody that sucks up air.
Is that right?
Usually, obviously, a homeowner and someone who's considered an in-ground swimming pool, and trying to cut costs on that, or they have a size restraint. They don't have the room to put a pool in. But we do see a lot for rehab. It's a great thing to helps with all kinds of for the health benefits are. From arthritis to diabetes to weight loss to just
to bad knees and ankles like me. I really can't run anymore because it's just too much damage on my body. But do people do that kind of thing, even just like jogging in them against the current? Yeah,
it has a grab rail right in front of the swim jets. Yeah, you're welcome to come down and try it out if you'd like, but you can grab onto that bar and sure, walk or jog, and that's kind of nice thing about, the warm water is when you're immersed in that, your buoyancy is about, it takes about 90% of your weight off, and so you reduce that stress on those joints, and it's very beneficial, and highly recommended for, arthritis or any kind of rehab for your knees, like you say, or back or injuries or any of that kind of stuff. I think just keeping healthy it's a good place to do it. It's in the warm water.
How long you been in this business, Ray?
Too long, about 35 years. We've been with Sundance Spas for 29 and Vida for the last 5, and both companies are highly related or rated in the industry. Sundance is 40 years old, and I believe Vida is about 38, 39. So,
hey, and we're running up into another commercial break, but tell us again, where are you located, and give us your website and some contact info where we could learn more about it.
You betcha. You can see all these at backyardsofamerica.com. We're 2 blocks south of 90th on the east side frontage road. It says Sundance Spas, and you can see us from the freeway. Now,
if I come down to try it out, do I need to bring my bathing suit?
I prefer that, sure.
Okay, I bet they all would. Ray, I'm going to give you another pitch as we go on with the show here, but anything else you want to tell the listeners about your products?
Well, you're welcome to come to our store and take a look. We've got some specials going on with factory rebates and incentives. You're looking for a hot tub. We represent one of the world's largest spa acrylic manufacturer in the world, Sundance Spas, but we can put you into a price point that makes sense for most families' needs, and we'd love to have you come down and take a look and see what spa would fit you guys. And we've got about 16 spas on the floor to look at.
That's terrific. If I had my suit with me today, I'd come down after the show. But I'm going to wait to get my daughter, and I'll take her down, and we'll take a look at what you got.
You betcha. You're welcome anytime.
Best of luck to you, Ray. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Same to you. Bye-bye.
Okay, we'll be right back with Talk with Ted and Sky. To Talk with Ted and Sky, this is number 24, a little bit of a scattered show. We're talking still political correctness, the industrial world, relations between folks with different views. We've told a couple of stories about Park City, and I think that it's important for all of us Utahns, whether these conflicts are taking place at the Delta Center during jazz games or at the Park City High School or on the street, that we all need to respect each other and respect each other's opinions a little bit more. I'll be back on Tuesday with Talk with Ted. We'll have Mark Shurtleff back, but I've got a couple interesting guests coming up. I'll have assistant coach of the Indiana Pacers, Bill Baino, is going to join me after the NBA season, after his NBA season is over. I'm also going to have my cousin, the magician Jeff McBride, come on, and he's masterful not only with sleight of hands, but with human psychology, and he'll have some interesting stuff. And I'm going to have child actor star Alfred Lutter. Alfred was in the movie The Bad News Bears back in the 70s with Tatum O'Neal and Walter Matthau. And Alfred's a friend of mine and a Stanford grad who owns a software company, and he's going to speak to Silicon Slopes and what we've got going on here in Utah. And right now, we've got Sky Lazaro, who thinks I'm an idiot. But
those were your words, not mine.
No, I don't know. I could see the look in your face. I think at times we're all idiots, right? And to suggest otherwise would probably not be true. But Sky's a criminal defense lawyer, as well as a personal injury lawyer, really a litigation specialist, and she's going to explain to us a little bit about the gay marriage case decided by the Supreme Court a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and this is a case decided in a 5-4 split back in 2015, Obergefell v. Hodges. And what this case came down to, and the decision that was ultimately made, was that state bans on same-sex marriage and recognizing same-sex marriages performed in other jurisdictions are unconstitutional under the Due Process and Equal Protection Clauses of the 14th Amendment. Now,
Sky, I remember Chief Justice Shelby here in Utah decided a local case here in Utah.
He did.
But that wasn't this case.
That was not this case, no.
But he decided that case before this case.
That's right. I believe that was the first decision to come out with regard to same-sex, the constitutionality of same-sex marriages or the ban on them.
And of all places on earth, it came out of Utah.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly. And I mean, it's huge props to him for the decision made.
Yeah, that he got it right.
Right.
You know, a lot of times people think that the federal judges are sort of making up the law on their own whims or beliefs. Do you think that's the case?
No.
And so what's the basis for this decision? And under what provisions of the Constitution did they rely on?
Well, they arise out of the 14th Amendment specifically. There was basically two questions that were presented in this case. One was the constitutionality of same-sex marriage bans, and the other one was the constitutionality of bans recognizing same-sex marriage. So, for instance, where Utah had said, you can get married, and then they moved to Washington or any other state, and they could then no longer, they had to recognize that as a legal union.
State to state.
State to state.
Including in like divorce proceedings
Correct.
and such when people move?
Correct.
Oh,
Yep.
Interesting.
And so that was the issue.
Hey, can I just have you, 14th Amendment, we lawyers sometimes take for granted that people know exactly what we're talking about. When you say 14th Amendment, what are you talking about?
The 14th Amendment does a variety of things. It defines citizenship, contains the privileges or immunities clause, which is it has to do with testifying on your own behalf or those sorts of things. The Due Process Clause, the Equal Protection Clause, and some post-Civil War issues, other post-Civil War issues.
And I do another little test to the kids that come that want to do a clerkship with me, and ask them to define due process in 2 words, because I think that's a term that can be a little bit confusing, even though it's such a simple little statement.
Yeah, I mean, I think at its core, due process basically boils down to your right to present your side, whether that be in a civil case or a criminal case.
Yep. The test that I give to the kids, I ask them to define it in 2 words. Define do. I'm going to do it to you again, Sky. Do.
Define do. I mean, if you do, you're owed something.
Owed. Bullseye. That's the one I look for. And process. What's another term for process?
Procedure.
Bullseye. See, all the kids get it wrong. They're in law school and they come out very confused about it. It's
training.
the owed procedure.
Correct.
Right? And then I ask sort of the rhetorical question, well, what procedure is owed?
Well, I think that's always the question that the courts struggle with and lawyers argue about. And
it kind of depends on what's being taken away.
Right.
Right. I like to give the example, if you refuse a breathalyzer after being pulled over on suspicion of DUI, the due process that you get is at the DMV. I'm sure you've done these.
Right.
You go to the DMV with a hearing officer, right? And you might have the police officer on the telephone, and you have a short hearing, and that's the extent of your due process. But if you're facing a death penalty,
right,
that's different.
Well, and I mean, you're talking about essentially strict liability versus something different as well. When we get our driver's license, you basically consent to taking a breath test.
But you still get a process.
You do get a process.
Yep. But you agree basically that if you don't blow, your license gets revoked.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Do you do DUIs?
I do some.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt you with Obergefell.
No. I think what's going to be interesting as these cases move forward is the change in the court. We've seen a significant change in our Supreme Court since 2015, and I'm hoping that RBG holds on a few more years.
That's Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Yeah.
But do you think that decision would be threatened by a subsequent court?
I think it's hard to say. I think it would. It would depend on the case. I think that was brought. It's hard to overturn precedent, but like I said, when you change the makeup of a court, those things happen.
Yeah, you don't know.
So,
yeah. I think it's interesting, that with the federal government and we've got, federalism here, where we've got the federal government and then the state governments, and there are many issues that affect our day-to-day lives that are decided by 9 lawyers on the Supreme Court.
Right.
Not really the democratic process. But a sort of, I know they're part of the democratic process, of course, the election, et cetera. But I just find it interesting that those deeply personal issues are addressed on federal constitutional law.
Right.
And I sometimes wonder if that's the way that the forefathers sort of saw it playing out.
Yeah, I don't know. And states are always free to give more protections to its citizens.
Great point.
Just not less.
Great point. And so these are the minimal protections.
Correct.
Yeah. Terrific point. And of course, we had back at that time, there were government officials that were refusing to marry people.
Yes. And clerks refusing to sign, marriage certificates, and judges refusing to do legal ceremonies. So
yeah.
it's we've come a long way. It's not perfect. It's not all the way there. But I think, recognizing that, the right to marry is a fundamental right and should be afforded to all people is start.
Because it's a beautiful thing having a companion.
Right.
Trusted companion. This world can be hard alone. It can be hard with the companion as well.
I'll refrain from comment on that.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. And Roe versus Wade decided back in 1973. That's another issue that comes up every year in national politics, and it's very divisive, and there's always concern about whether a conservative court would overturn that or place more restrictions on it. And the liberals would have you believe that it would be completely overruled. The conservatives would have you believe that it would be broadened endlessly. But I like to have some faith in the doctrine of stare decisis, if I said that correctly, but let the decision stand. And Roe versus Wade is now 46 years old, I think.
Right. Well, and I think what's important about all these cases that deal specifically with individual rights is we have a tendency to people, if we don't agree with it, abortion is a very divisive issue. I mean, people are either for or against it. And that's, I don't think, should be the question. The question is, we have to kind of take a step back from it and say, okay, it's not about me. I have the right to choose whether I would get one or not get one. But what's important is if we start letting these liberties erode away because we don't agree with it, pretty soon they start coming for you.
Yeah.
I think we talked about the kid in Park City talking about the Jews and and that sort of thing, and it reminded me of the Holocaust memorial, and the quote that's on that is, first they came for the socialists and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. And then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. And I think that, really when we start talking about equal protection under the law and civil rights and liberties, that's really what it's about.
So you better be careful if you're being selective about wanting to restrict people's established constitutional rights. Because we've all got vested interests in many of them.
Right.
Even though we may have some differences of opinion, take, for instance, the Second Amendment.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So you make a great point. And there's some precedent that people are allowed to have their guns.
Yes.
In the same way that there's now precedent that women are allowed to choose.
Right.
Interesting stuff. And I found that that Park City kid's letter particularly interesting because the other day I was talking about the Seinfeld, the great Seinfeld show, and how it's now become a bit politically incorrect, some of the Seinfeld episodes, and there's even some objection to the Soup Nazi episode. Right?
And it's still the best one.
No soup
Yes.
for you. And here we have a Jewish kid being called a Nazi because he's conservative.
Right.
And boy, that is a big, broad, awful label to call a teenage kid simply because he has conservative values. Because the
Yes.
Nazis, that term in its strict sense, they're mass murderers, like the quote from the Holocaust. What was that from again? What you read?
The memorial.
The memorial.
I think it's in Washington, D.C.
Beautiful. That really kind of tied it up. Roe versus Wade is interesting because everybody remembers Jane Roe was the plaintiff, and I don't know. She's been out. She's a well-known woman. But that case involved also a medical doctor originally,
Right.
who had been charged with crimes because the law in many states at the time was that you couldn't have an abortion unless there was a direct threat to the life of the woman. Mm-hmm. And then you get into medical ethics and medical diagnosis, and what does that mean as a direct threat to the life of the woman. And and it also involved another couple who the woman had some sort of medical condition where it was she would have some health conditions if she became pregnant, and she went off of birth control and then joined that lawsuit. And in her case and her husband's case, they said that she didn't have a sort of a ripe issue. She didn't have a significant present injury to.
She wasn't pregnant.
Yeah, and so
essentially.
Yep, and so her case was dismissed, or she was not allowed to pursue it as being sort of not ripe. I forget the exact term. That she didn't have a case in controversy.
Yes.
Right. The doctor's case, interestingly, and you probably know this, he was told you can't fight that fight here in this declaratory judgment action. You can raise that issue as a defense in your criminal case.
Correct.
But originally the case had those three different plaintiffs, and the decision deals with all three of them.
Yeah, it's an interesting decision.
It is an interesting
Certainly.
decision, especially the beginning of it is really kind of unprecedented. Alan, I can't see the clock. How much time do we have? 1 minute. So if I could find it here. Also, that case that you have, the gay marriage case, that was a 5-4 decision with 4 different separate dissenting opinions.
That's correct.
It's got 5 opinions, that
Yes.
case, which is interesting. But Roe versus Wade, 1973, this is unlike any case that I've ever read before, the beginning of it. The first 2-3 paragraphs, and it's written by Justice Blackmun. Quote, this Texas federal appeal and its Georgia companion, Doe versus Bolton, present constitutional challenges to state criminal abortion legislation. The Texas statutes under attack here are typical of those that have been in effect in many states for approximately a century. The Georgia statutes, in contrast, have a modern cast and are a legislative product that, to an extent at least, obviously reflects the influences of recent attitudinal changes of advancing medical knowledge and techniques and of new thinking about an old issue. We forthwith acknowledge our awareness of the sensitive and emotional nature of the abortion controversy, of vigorous opposing views even among physicians, and of the deep and seemingly absolute convictions that the subject inspires. One's philosophy, one's experiences, one's exposure to the raw edges of human existence, one's religious training, one's attitudes toward life and family and their values, and the moral standards one establishes and seeks to observe are all likely to influence and to color one's thinking and conclusions about abortion. In addition, population growth, pollution, poverty, and racial overtones tend to complicate and not simplify the problem. Just an incredible preamble to a very important case. And we'll be right back with our final segment of Talk with Ted and Sky. Back to Talk with Ted and Sky, a show about
about a lot today.
Half nothing. I won't. I do that as a bit of a joke with the Seinfeld thing. But I got to make one more pitch for my band Rush.
Canada.
You in Canada. And what's your affiliation with Canada? Hockey.
I like Canada.
Hockey, like Canada. Very cool. Rush has got a song called Freewill. And free will is an interesting concept, and my buddy Alan and I were talking about it today. And of course, there's a whole bunch of different philosophical theories, predeterminism, and whether life is divinely guided, and whether we have control over things or not. And there's a great quote that I used when I was in 9th grade. I had 2 girlfriends. Shout out to Carrie McKenna and Pam Brady, and I owe apologies to both of them because I was told that I needed to make a choice. I was a fortunate guy, and I had 2 really cute girls interested in me. And I quoted Rush that from the Free Will song that if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. Well, that's great philosophically. Practically, it didn't do me much good because you can imagine what happened then. I was then alone. But I think free will is an interesting concept because many of us, I think, believe that we have it, but it might be a difficult thing to prove philosophically. How could you ever prove that you really do, in fact, have free will? So that's just my thoughtless thought for the day. But I'm going to turn it back over to you, Sky, and we were talking about Roe versus Wade and constitutional rights, and you made a brilliant point about people need to be careful about those rights that exist, that they want to take away some and broaden others. You made a really brilliant point last segment.
Thanks, I appreciate that. I think, and maybe it's just been my time as a defense attorney over the last decade plus, it becomes glaringly apparent that while you may not agree with the way people live or the things they do, they have a right to do it.
Yeah.
And we defend those cases and represent those people and bring civil actions on their behalfs for those very reasons.
Would you represent a Nazi? Flying a Nazi flag? If you had a right to fly the flag?
Sure.
Yeah, because
I would because we're. There was an interesting point brought up in some chats that I think I saw online and in a forum I'm part of, and there were some attorneys being attacked, and I think it kind of spawned out of the Weinstein case, where attorneys were being, specifically his attorney was being attacked, who's a Harvard professor. How could you? Why would you represent that guy? And his response was brilliant. Is of course you represent that guy because some of the most important laws we have and case law we have and rights we have borne out of cases with unpopular defendants. Yeah,
and we're not going to make the lawyers the judges of everything.
No,
right?
And we're not our clients. I
right.
mean, we're we have our own free will.
Right. We hope we like to think.
We like to think we do.
Right?
But turning back to Roe v. Wade. Interestingly, in this opinion, it was stated, and I'm just going to read it verbatim. It is thus apparent that at common law, at the time of the adoption of our Constitution and throughout the major portion of the 19th century, abortion was viewed with less disfavor than under our most current statutes currently in effect. Phrasing it another way, women enjoyed a substantially broader right to terminate a pregnancy than she does in most states today. And I think this kind of goes back to, are we allowing our rights to slowly be eroded away because maybe we're not saying anything? If part of free will is just sitting back and not voicing our opinion or not voting or not getting involved, we're complacent in it, and you're as responsible for them being taken away as the people trying to take them away at that point.
Yeah, the government can be a dangerous thing. taking rights away from people, taking property away from people, taking liberty away from people. But yeah, that decision, though, it speaks about how it was actually easier maybe in pioneer days, or there was less public opposition to a woman having an abortion than what developed in the 1950s and 60s and in the 20th century.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, one of the things that's amazing about this opinion, too, is that it's so medical.
Yes, they do refer extensively to the Hippocratic Oath that physicians take to do no harm, and perhaps, performing an abortion violates that. It also talks, and it talks about when an abortion can be appropriate, if there's a substantial or risk of danger to the mother. And then they go on to talk about health and life risks in regard to the abortion itself. So the performance of an abortion and what's important for a physician to, the important factors of that. And they looked at the skill of the physician, the environment in which it's performed, the duration of the pregnancy is determined by uterine size and confirmed by menstrual history, so basically gestation time.
Yeah. And, the American Medical Association at the turn of the 20th century was very much against abortions. And then they kind of, by the time 1970 came around, they had quite a different position, I think in large part because of what you're saying, that the procedures were much more safe then. They
were safe, and I think they're, and this may not have anything to do with it, but just from sort of an outsider's perspective, people were getting abortions. Right. It wasn't that abortion wasn't happening, it's that it was happening in very high-risk, dangerous forums. It was happening in back alleys and by people who probably shouldn't be performing any medical procedures.
Yeah. We see that now with plastic surgery.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Double check. Groupon is not always your friend.
Is that right? Is that right? Get the discount?
Yeah. There's things worth paying for, and it's your face.
One thing I found curious about this decision, too, is that in 1970, with the American Medical Association sort of having a change of stance on it, they said back at that time that psychiatric consultation should not be mandatory with someone that has an abortion, and only in a specific case. And of course, back at that time, and I'm not exactly sure what the exact context of that quote, but back then there was stigmatism associated with psychiatric problems, and I think that there's much less so now, much less stigmatism associated with psychiatric problems.
Yeah, I think we're definitely moving ahead as a society to address mental health, and part of that is just being aware of it, and that so many people have issues, and that you're better to be open about them.
And they also speak largely in the opinion about a woman's freedom and a woman's health and well-being, but there's not a lot of discussion in it about the psychological health of a woman in having an unwanted pregnancy.
Right. And actually in this case, Roe, who is a moniker, was not a real name, but she ultimately had the baby. And the baby was placed for adoption, I believe.
Oh, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I may have known that in the past, but that escaped me. Fascinating stuff. Hopefully we didn't stir up too much controversy with that. But I do think that the use of this decision in national politics is a bit of a false fight. I understand that there are important issues and fighting the limitations. They still try to place limitations on things, and it is an important fight. But personally, I don't see it being overruled.
I would hope not. I think the court ultimately concluded that this was basically a right of personal privacy. This is something that should be made in your own home.
And I think if they were to go back on that, it would, like you say, would implicate a lot of other rights, because I enjoy what privacy I have.
Yeah, it's not just about abortion. it then becomes about every other thing that they want to attack.
Yeah. I just don't like to see it as such a hot issue in national politics driving the election of our federal officials when I feel that it's been decided. It's a past issue, and I think both sides inflame it in order to try to gain a political advantage.
I agree. I think it's a moot issue when it comes to who's going to lead our country or who's going to lead our city or county or whatever it is.
And yet there are
really
some people
matter.
that would say I'll never be a Republican because of Roe versus Wade, and vice versa. I'll never switch from a Republican. I'd never vote for a Democrat because of this moral belief that you'd then be endorsing this or...
Right. And my guess is, while the parties may take a stance on this, you're going to find plenty of people within those parties that fall on both sides of the issue.
Yeah. It's a difficult issue, and it's even a more difficult one for a man to understand.
Yeah, I mean, to be candid, as a woman, I don't particularly appreciate men's opinions on it, in all honesty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's
I
one
think,
one view, and I'll tell you in candor, I'm slightly offended at that, but I understand.
Well, and I mean, and actually to qualify that as in certain instances, I think there are instances where it's also a man's child too. So they probably get to be a part of that conversation.
But I'll never be in a position, and it's not because I'm 52 years old, but I'll never be in a position where I would have to make a decision about that and to go through that and to live with that one way or the other. And so in that sense, you have more say than I do.
Perhaps, yeah.
Yeah, I think so, because it's easy for me to say, I would never do that.
Right.
I'm too moral.
But what if you're...
I'm saying that, hypothetically. Right? But just like as a man, I would never do that.
Right.
I'm too righteous. I'm too moral. And one, as a practical matter, I could never get myself in that position.
Correct. Physically. Ever. Literally.
Yep. Of course, now, the modern day and age, I could go through some sort of procedure and change things. But now we're on to a different topic.
Yep.
Great stuff, Sky. What are you up to tomorrow? What do you got going on in the law business tomorrow?
Tomorrow's not too bad of a day. I think I have a pretrial conference in the morning and just in the office the rest of the day.
What kind of case? What kind of case are you handling?
It's an assault.
An assault?
Mm-hmm.
Felony or misdemeanor?
Felony.
Felony cases are tough.
Yeah, I think that's probably 99% of my criminal practice.
Is it?
Yeah.
I'm referring the felonies to you.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
And I've told you this before. I don't have enough experience in the criminal law to feel competent in handling a felony case. There's simply too much at stake. I don't have the relationships with the prosecutors. I don't have the familiarity with the subtleties of the law, and so I generally pass on them. But I do stumble into a few of them occasionally because I've got some friends out there that don't know how to stay out of trouble.
Don't we all?
But I'll pass them on to you. I'm doing fair housing cases and Mark Shurtleff's case, and I'll get you involved in Mark Shurtleff's case if we end up teaming up. It's a fascinating case.
Yeah.
And real, what we allege are flagrant government abuses. Do you know they made allegations that Mark went on a trip to California to the Pelican, I think it was called the Pelican Hill Resort, where he went to finish writing his book, and he was seen there with a man who he had prosecuted, and there were allegations that someone else paid for the trip and paid for all of Mark's expenses. And there was no proof of it, none whatsoever, zero. It was a sheer coincidence that the two were there. But somebody saw them together, and somebody else said, well, they must have paid for it. And that's one of the 7 charges had to do with that. It was really just awful what happened to Mark Shurtleff.
Both those cases where I think it obviously didn't work out real well for the
And you say
government.
both with John Swallow,
Yes.
who went to trial and
Yeah.
won. Did you listen to my interview of Troy Rawlings?
I did.
That was a good one. Do you know
Yeah,
Troy?
Troy is a fabulous prosecutor
Yeah,
and human being.
Yeah, he really is.
Mm-hmm.
And we need more people like Troy on the prosecuting side. Sky, thanks for joining me. I'm sure it's not the last time that you're going to do this with me. It was a great pleasure.
Always happy to be here.
And we're going to talk about the volunteer project, community service project that my daughter's going to do. But thanks for listening, folks. It's Talk with Ted. I'll be back on Tuesday. Enjoy the sunshine. Enjoy Easter and the weekend and your family and your lives. Thanks for listening.